Good afternoon, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Jim Hardy. I'm a field director with the Mass Association of School Committees, and welcome to our June 2024 edition of our Learning Lunch. Today's session is going to focus on the role of the chair of the school committee and the importance of that position to ensure that the meetings are functional, that they're productive, and that they are in line with the mission and objectives of the school district. Excuse me. As many of our documents in our trainings talk about the role of the chair, we use the term servant of the assembly, in that the chair has no more inherent authority as any other member of the school committee, but the significant role of the chair is to ensure that every member of the committee has opportunity to be heard, that their opinion has an opportunity to be shared, but that no one person takes over the committee meeting for a specific agenda. So in the term servant of the assembly, it's the chair serves the committee to ensure that their meetings are productive and that they follow an established agenda and if the committee's established operating protocols on how they're going to operate as a group, that those protocols are adhered to, as well as the district's policies and the parliamentary rules of Robert's Rules of Order, if that's the parliamentary process you've adopted. But while they are the servant of the assembly, they are the first among equals in that the chair is often the spokesperson for the committee. Public comments or public statements are generally funneled through the chair. So as the public representative of the school committee, it might be a more public position than any other ones, but it still equals with everyone. And we should, chief volunteer. Most of our committees in Massachusetts do not receive any compensation. There are some that do, and they're typically city school committees. But it's the chief volunteer, the chief dishwasher, bottle washer, so forth, whatever term you want to use. But we'll talk a little bit about the extra time that's required for the position if you are the chair versus a member of the school committee, and then what some of those challenges may entail. I use John Carver a lot with both role of chair and some of my policy work that I do with districts. John Carver wrote a book in 1990 called Boards That Make a Difference. And then in about 12 years later, he wrote another book, and it was the Policy Governance Model. But this slide comes from Boards That Make a Difference, which was published in 1990. It's actually, you can find it on page 144 if you're looking at it. But in particular, Carver's comments about the position of the chair, and he describes it as a job. So first, it's someone who can handle and or work through a group decision-making process, ensuring that every voice has an opportunity to be heard, that every person's voice is given equal weight and value. But in leading that group, fairly but firmly, in not letting the meetings get bogged down. One of my favorite lines from this part of the book is that the chair's responsibility is to ensure that everyone speaks once before anyone speaks twice. And that's just simply being firm in running the meeting and saying, calling on people, not letting people just shut out comments or interrupt people who have the floor. It's kind of ensuring the decorum is followed. One of the Tim Lincecum's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, talks about the dysfunction is the lack of conflict. And having the chair having the ability to welcome diversity of comments and opinions, yet keep everything civil during those discussions is somewhat of an art form, and it's something you have to learn. But that's one of the key characteristics of being an effective chair, is that your colleagues feel you manage the meetings fairly, and you will step in if someone is trying to dominate the discussion. And finally, the last characteristics for the chair, as far as the job goes, is the ability to adhere to the agreed upon rules, whether that be policies that the school committee has adopted, or if you've gone so far as establishing board protocols, which are simply agreed upon rules of how your meetings are going to operate. And it spells out, and usually every committee member signs these rules, so everyone's agreeing that this is how we want to work. This is how we want to work, particularly when it comes to individual members' conduct at meetings. The ability to make sure that those rules that get followed is a key characteristic of the position as well. So we always talk about the role of the chair is more than simply presiding over the meetings. There's a lot of things that you do as chair. If anybody's in the room is a chair now, you know that it's not just showing up at the meeting and running with it. It does take time outside of the meetings for proper planning, working with the superintendent to develop an agenda that meets the needs of the business you need to conduct, as well as in line with some of the goals and objectives the district may have established for the year. Again, attention to detail, making sure that discussions that appear at the meeting or come up at the meeting are in line with what's on the agenda, being able to tie things back to specific goals and objectives. Leadership skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, those are all leadership characteristics. The ability to run the meeting, be functional in that, communicate with your colleagues as to things that are going on, and then working one-on-one with the administration, as well as maybe some of your individual members, to make sure the information flows in a thoughtful manner. Some knowledge obligations, obviously, the top three there are the open meeting law, knowing what the requirements are if members are calling for meetings, 48 hours notice for a meeting, doesn't include Saturdays, Sundays, legal holidays. And the other thing you always have to take into consideration is, when does the town clerk's office close? Just because you want to post a meeting for, let's say today's Friday, so Saturday, Sunday, so Tuesday night, if you were to send it over there, a lot of town clerks' offices close noontime, 1 o'clock on Fridays. So being aware of because the clerk has to stamp receive it in order to be valid. So just because you sent it there doesn't necessarily qualify as a posting. Collective bargaining, same issues, knowing if the things come up at your meetings, if that's going to have an impact on your collective bargaining agreement, knowing how to handle that and which way to move to it. And then conflict of interest, knowing, do any of your members have any potential conflicts? The typical one comes up in some of the smaller communities, because the school district's the biggest employer in the town, is that there may be a school committee member with a member of their immediate family on the staff of the school, whether it be a custodian, teacher, secretary, whatever. Knowing what that member can and cannot do, or cannot participate in, would be an important aspect of the job as well. So it's knowing your members, knowing their connections to the schools, and being able to communicate effectively with them. Part of that communication might be how information gets shared with them, whether it be phone calls, text messages, emails, whatever the case might be. Having a conversation with each member, say, how do you want to receive information? If I have to send something out, what's the best way for me to get it to you in the most timely manner. And it might mean that you have to do a text message to two and emails to the rest, but what you're trying to be is an effective leader and having effective communication skills. So some of the key responsibilities that the responsibilities of the chair that have been identified in not only Carver's book, but another publication called Becoming a Better Board Member that's published by the National School Board Association, is guiding the committee's work. Ensuring that what's happening at the meeting is tied to what your objectives are for the year. A little bit later, we're going to talk about something called a year-long agenda. But that would be, if you had a year-long agenda, would be, does this, what we wanted to talk about at this meeting that we had scheduled for this, is that what's actually happening, or are we behind, or are we ahead, whatever the case might be. But we'll talk a little bit about year-long agendas in a minute. Keeping the committee organized, making sure that the information that they need to partake in discussion and debate, as well as decision-making, is made available to them in a timely manner. Part of that might be ensuring that if a staff presentation is going to occur, that the committee has ample time to review the material before the presentation. Probably one of the most frustrating things that the field directors hear from individual school committee members is that there's a presentation at their meeting and the material is handed to them at the table when they get there, and then they're expected to make a decision on it later that meeting as an action item. And that just, that leads to frustration at the committee table, and sometimes that's expressed in the deliberation. The committee member doesn't know whether to focus on the material or the presenter, trying to keep ahead of it. And if they had the material 48 hours in advance or even more, they would have had an opportunity to review the material ahead of time and know what they want to key on or focus on in the presentation. But it also allows them to be better prepared to ask more relevant questions during the presentation. Again, chair focuses on mission, vision, goals, objectives. One of my favorite questions when I'm doing workshops in the committee is what is your mission statement for your district? And while some people know it, generally speaking, in broad terms, I've yet to have one person recite it back to me without looking it up. They know where to find it, but part of what you're trying to do is keep the action of the committee, what they're doing, in line with how does this help us achieve our mission? How does this help us? How does this decision move us forward in our goals? Being able to tie decisions and actions of the committee to specific goals and objectives enables you to demonstrate to the community you're moving towards a specific target. And that target hopefully is centered around student achievement. Most of the discussions and presentations at your committee table might seem perfunctory, like, why do we even have to do this? Well, it could be because the law requires it or your own policy requires it. But generally speaking, things like field trips and so forth are, a lot of those are perfunctory votes, and maybe they don't necessarily have to come before the committee, or they can be on something like a consent agenda. But looking at what work that's going on, what you're doing at the committee table, and being able to tie it specifically back, how does this help us improve the education level for students? And saying that out loud, how this ties back to your student achievement goals, again, shows the community where your focus is. And that, when the community knows the direction of the school committee and schools, that's a lot easier for them to be supportive when they know exactly where you're headed. Another thing that is important is we call the shared leadership responsibilities. A lot of committees have a vice chair, but that vice chair only does something when the chair is not there. The chair can be as inclusive as they would like to with the vice chair position, but the other one that's even often overlooked is the chair of any subcommittees that you may have. Subcommittee work can be an extremely effective tool to move the agenda along. and not limit debate, but focus debate at the committee table for any proposal that's coming before you, if it's been vetted by a subcommittee. I know policy changes a lot. A lot of committees have pretty effective policy subcommittees, and they kind of move everything. They refer policy things back to the subcommittee for the bigger discussions, if you will. But what comes back to the committee is a proposal that's kind of been vetted a little bit with administrators, which has been vetted with the school committee members. It may contain some compromises, but and if the committee as a whole recognizes and respects the work of the school committee, the subcommittee, excuse me, then it makes your debates at the table, at the committee meeting, a lot more focused and effective. And again, when we talk about the committee being greater than the sum of its parts, one of the major responsibilities the chair has is to know what strengths each member brings to the table. Some people are really good with numbers. Some people are really good with words and speaking and making presentations. Recognize the strengths that each member brings, and then put them in a place to succeed or a position to succeed. People who are really good with numbers typically get frustrated on a policy subcommittee that's generally all words. Someone who is really good in writing and so forth can actually help break down those complicated policies into more user-friendly language, to make it more valuable to the members of the community who are looking at these documents and get a better understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. So if you don't know what each committee member you serve with, of what their major responsibilities are and what their hobbies are, you're not taking full advantage of the parts that you have around you, and to help make things more effective in being able to, again, not only put people in the right seats on the bus, or not only put people on the right bus, but put them in the right seats on the bus. I see a question here. Was wondering if policy and financial, first of all, please don't do anonymous. I'd like to know who I'm speaking with. I was wondering if policy and financial subcommittees are required by legal mandate. Open meeting law can make scheduling meetings very hard. Are there any other group structures that can meet if they're not quorum numbers without having to do the whole agenda 48 hours? So policy, there are no required by law subcommittees. Many are strongly recommended and are considered best practices. The two you cite there, as well as negotiations, are three of the probably the more commonly used subcommittees. Just remember that a subcommittee of the school committee is less than a quorum. So if you have a 7-member committee, you can have 3 members on a subcommittee. While open meeting law can make it difficult, don't forget you still have the ability to do subcommittee meetings on Zoom. So sometimes it's not, if somebody can do a subcommittee meeting during their lunch break, and everybody else can do the same thing, you can always schedule subcommittee meetings on Zoom. Yes, they have to be posted. Yes, you have to publish the link, but there are opportunities for scheduling that allow other than in-person meetings. Are there any other group structures that can meet if they are not quorum numbers without having to do the whole agenda for you? If you're talking about subcommittees there, then there is no way you can get away with 48 hours or posting an agenda 48 hours prior to the meeting. The other option that exists is if it's a group that's not reporting directly to the school committee, then the superintendent could establish task force or a working group or something like that, as long as there are other members of that committee that are not school committee members. If you wanted to do a study or a discussion or a research into redistricting, you're overpopulated in one elementary school and underpopulated in the other, and you want to redraw the district lines, instead of having that as excuse me, as a subcommittee of the school committee, you could establish a task force which would have administrators, school committee members, parents, so forth on it. And if that group, if their recommendation is to go to the superintendent, and then the superintendent will make the recommendation to the school committee, then that's outside of the open meeting law requirements. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, there are union contracts that do spell out subcommittees. And thank you, Myra, about the one in Lawrence about using Zoom. Appreciate that. Moving on a little bit. So before the meeting even starts, there are certain jobs or responsibilities the chair has. One is working with the superintendent to plan an effective meeting, developing, placing items on the agenda, having a system in place for committee members to actually get questions answered before the meeting even starts, and receiving the supporting material before the meeting. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about each one here. There is a tool that some committees are using called a year-long agenda. Now, if you look back from last September and you look at all the items that were on your agendas starting in the beginning of the school year, some of those happen during that period of time for a reason, whether it be a requirement of a vote or something that was scheduled, or you might have a desire to have different departments update the committee on curriculum changes, revisions, ongoing program changes, so forth, and you schedule them throughout the year. And so you're not getting all of those in September and October, you know, really tying up those meetings. But it's putting the things on, like starting next September, going to next June. What do we have to do? What do we always do in September? What do we always do in October? You start plugging those into a 12-month calendar for those particular months. We always have budget presentations here and here. You plug those in. You always have handbook presentations, handbook changes presentations during these months. You always have your school improvement council discussions, the school improvement plan and district improvement plan discussions during this period of month. If you're going into a contract negotiation year, you know you're going to have negotiation sessions or executive sessions related to strategies. Stop plugging those in. You know, when you're doing your superintendent evaluation, plug in when the mid-year review is going to be. When do we approve the goals at the very beginning of the year? When are we going to have the presentation of the articles of evidence? When are we going to vote on and discuss the summative evaluation? You start plugging all of that in. Now, I know this is difficult when chairs change, particularly in those communities that have spring elections. The chair may change before the year is done. But if you have the plan and you set it out, the next chair, if you don't continue, then the next person has a blueprint for April, May, June, or whenever the organizational meeting is to move forward. And then that person will be responsible for setting up the next calendar year. What I don't encourage you to do is backload the end of the year, because you never know what's going to creep up to show up at your meetings. You never know what that unexpected thing is. So don't backload May, June, April, May, June in your calendar. That's what you end up, that's what you're doing now, because you don't have a plan. You can't take some of those things that you know you have to do and move them earlier But if you have that year-long agenda, you're able to do that. We have some samples in the office of some year-long agendas, and if anybody's interested in taking a look at it, any of them, they can just send me an email, and I will forward the samples to you so you can review them. So if you have a year, even if you don't have a year-long agenda, but I'm going to go with discussion of both. If you don't or you do, part of your job is to get an agenda set up with the superintendent. So one of the things that the superintendent needs committee action on, and one of the other, going back to rules about protocols, one of the rules that is developing and becoming more favorable is that if there is a presentation to the committee, a vote cannot occur until the next meeting. It forces the administration to do a little pre-planning, which is exactly what you want. But unless it's an emergency, and then if in that case, the committee would have to vote to waive their protocol about it. But presentations that are going to require action, it's not considered best practice to have that presentation and vote at the same meeting. It doesn't give the committee members opportunity to digest. Some of the best questions I ever came up with in my life came the day after a vote that I was forced to take part in at the same meeting. It doesn't give you a chance to digest it. It doesn't give you a chance to kind of investigate a little bit, ask a few more follow-up questions and so forth. Now, I'm not suggesting you ask follow-up questions in between the two meetings, but it would be, I think it's important as far as keeping communication lines open and having staff presentations be positive things for you, that if questions come up, if you are presentation, then voting the next meeting, if questions come up during the next meeting, would be to send those to the superintendent. These are the questions I have. I'd like to ask these at the meeting that we're going to vote at. Please be prepared to answer these questions. A lot of times the questions that you have are the same questions members of the community have. And if you ask those questions at the public meeting, members of the community have an opportunity to hear the question and hear the response as well. So that's a big part of trying to get this, have your meetings be effective. Part of it is sharing information with your community, but also in part, having the community be aware or having a sense of how you make decisions. What's the thought process? If they can understand how you came to a decision, whether they agree with the decision or not, they say, well, I understand how you got there. I disagree with it, but I can understand your thought process. That's a huge, huge plus in building confidence from the community to the committee. And when that confidence gets built, trust gets built. And when your committee has the trust of the community, there's really nothing you can't do within reason. And then, as I said before, part of your protocols may be that any presentation that's going to occur, the committee has to receive the materials at least 48 hours in advance. So you have an opportunity to review them ahead of time. I know some of you have members of your committee that don't look a darn thing ahead of time, and they're probably opening their material for the very first time at the meeting. You know what? You can lead a horse to water. But most of your members probably do read materials ahead of time. So peer pressure is a great thing in some cases, in that if the committee members are prepared in advance, it may encourage the other person to do the exact same thing. Let's see. So at the meeting, a lot of agendas are structured so that the business stuff is done at the end. There are some things that you may want to do at the beginning, but for the most part, it's, reports, discussions, votes is kind of like the order of things. Just structure the agenda that works best for your committee. There is no one way of doing things with agendas. If you have an agenda format that you like and it's working for you, there's no reason to change it. It's not one of those things, change for the sake of change is a good thing. No, if it's working for you, you do that. One of the things that some committees have adopted is what's called a consent agenda. And a consent agenda is nothing more than one agenda item that lists 4 or 5 things that are considered housekeeping. Many times things like minutes of the previous meetings, voting the payment of the warrant, the bills component, and maybe if you have to approve field trips, sometimes field trips get put in there. If you've had the discussion at the previous meeting, and maybe even some things that, the chair might think, this is a no-brainer, let's put this in the consent agenda. Now, the thing about a consent agenda you have to remember is that any one member can move something removed from the consent agenda to act on separately. And as long as, generally speaking, one person says that, it's out of the consent agenda and you act upon it. But if you list 4 things in the consent agenda, that's 1 vote. It doesn't save a whole lot of time, but it just makes your meetings a little bit more effective. The other thing, and this is a group dynamic component, is the boardroom layout. Prior to cable TV, many school committees met, and it was like a rectangle or a round table or a horseshoe, so that every member could see every member. Because of cable TV, many of you have gone to one long table across the front, and this person can't see this person at the other end of the table. That it's not ideal for group dynamics, group discussions. It's really important for committee members to be able to look at other committee members. Like they say that, like 20% of what I observe or what I retain is what I hear. 20% is what I read, but 60% is what I see. And whether it be the presentation or the facial expressions or the hand gestures of the person who's speaking sets, really kind of helps drive home what the person's trying to say. So be able to understand what that person's trying to tell you. So board layout's an important thing. Length of meetings is another component. In reality, people have a tendency to kind of lose focus after 2 hours of continuous meeting. If you know your meeting is going to run for 2 hours, you may consider putting a break in there in the middle to break it up. And then trying to keep meetings, and this is what, this time of the year, meetings are longer because there's all this stuff that piled up during the year that you now need action on. And, that's kind of like part of the whole thing about having presentations and actions at the same meeting. Sometimes there's questions that come up and the information is not available, so you end up delaying the vote, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it adds to an agenda that you probably already had full to begin with. Staff presentations are another one. If the committee wanted to have an update on the changes or the changes that have been made to the middle school math curriculum that were approved last year, and it's like more of a how are we doing kind of thing. If that's what you're looking for, make sure you tell the staff member that. Don't say we're looking for an update on the math program. That's not specific enough. What you're liable to get is the history of math in your district, back to the abacus days, because the staff member is trying to make sure that they don't miss the thing that you're looking at. And instead of a 10-minute presentation, you're going to get an hour and 15 minutes on the history of math. Make sure the staff member is aware specifically of what you're looking for and how much time they have for the presentation and the deadline for submitting materials to you ahead of time, right? So what are you looking to look specifically? We want an update on the introduction of the new math curriculum in grades 6 through 8. That the math curriculum was approved last year. An update, how it's going. Then we were allocating 15 minutes for this presentation, and our meeting is on Tuesday night, so we want the material in our hands no later than the Thursday previously. Boom. That way the staff member knows exactly what's expected of them. You get exactly what you're looking for. And instead of, the history of math where 45 minutes into it, you are frustrated because you're not getting what you asked for, but you have to be really clear about what you're looking at and what you're looking for from the staff member. So be really articulate about specifically what you're looking for from staff presentations. The other thing is handling deliberations at meetings. And this is where the chair can really shine for your committee. Is ensuring that everyone's talking about the issue, that no one's being attacked personally. One of the other sessions we do is called, dealing with difficult behaviors, or it comes from a book that's titled Working with People I Can't Stand. It's actually a good book. But ensuring that the people, if I disagree with you, I'm not attacking you. I'm working with the issue, and that's where the chair can say, excuse me, Mr. Hardy, you should, please stay focused on the issue and not the individual person. You should be clear that the chair should be ensuring that the focus stays on the issue, not on the people, not on the personalities. Julia, no, I am not suggesting the chair should communicating directly with the staff, but you would send that communication through the superintendent to the staff. You would tell the superintendent clearly what you're looking for from that presentation, and the superintendent would communicate it to the staff member. Thank you for that clarification. I did not mean to imply that the chair is communicating directly with the staff if I did. But no, that communication to the staff member would go through the chair. Go through the superintendent, excuse me. So again, staying focused on the issue at hand, not the people or the personalities at the table. And then again, just like the Supreme Court, who makes laws of the land on split votes all the time, majority rules. Members were, school committee members were elected to a board, and the board has the authority. So if I'm on a 7-member board, I have to convince 3 other people that my position is the right one. If I can't do that, and the majority goes in a different direction, that's it. Majority rules. What's next on the agenda? We try to encourage members that if you are on the dissenting side, once the committee is ruled, that's the end of it. Do not continue to belabor it and continue to go to social media, blasting the rest of the committee, telling them how they're wrong. That just leads to disharmony in your committee, and then you become that guy, that member, the one that no matter what motion you make, no one will second it, and you'll never have a chance of ever being voted as chair because you're not the team, you're not working with the team, so to speak. So you don't want to be that member. Some new challenges that have come up, not so much new now, but they're still evolving, and that's public comment. The challenges of remote meetings and the public participation via remote. Public comment has been through a number of court cases, and I'm not sure it's still 100% done, but this is where we are. Basically, for 3 minutes, if you have a public comment policy, I'm not sure you're aware, but that's not a legal requirement to have a public comment policy or have a public comment period. In fact, by law, no one has the right to speak at your meetings unless recognized by the presiding officer or through a public comment policy. The statute's pretty clear. And so if you do have public comment, that for those 3 minutes or whoever amount of time you allow them, they can basically say anything about you, about the committee, about the superintendent. Because the rules of slander and libel are different for a public official than they are for a private citizen. But it should not be a dialogue. And this is where we talk about, on the previous slide, about deliberation. Deliberation should be solely focused on those items on the agenda that you have posted to the public that you are going to talk about in advance. You've told the public ahead of time, these are the discussion items for this particular meeting. If you get into a, sorry, pollen allergies are racking up. If you get into a deliberation with a member of the audience on something that comes up with public comment, you gave the public no advance notice of that deliberation. So that's something you have to be really careful of. It's one way. They're talking to you. If there is something that somebody flat out says is wrong, a savvy superintendent, because usually public comments at the beginning of the meeting, a savvy superintendent can work in the correct information into their report without necessarily engaging in a direct commentary with the individual who raised it. The challenge with remote meetings is it's very difficult sometimes to hear everybody. It's very difficult to maintain engagement with everybody, although you kind of have that Brady Bunch thing going on the screen. But a lot of members will turn their cameras off because of poor internet connections, or everybody in the house is on their Wi-Fi at the same time. So you kind of lose the dynamic of being able to see everybody there. And you lose the dynamic of just a live audience, being with your colleagues and working together for the betterment of the kids in your district. But the public participation part, again, is part of the when you're going remote or you're doing hybrid, where some people are remote and some people are in person, ensuring that the public has the same access that you're providing everybody is making sure that the link to that is available. Some rules you may want to put in about online and the public participation online. We typically, like for this format, we use a webinar format, which means that only the panelists or the presenters are being on the screen. Everybody else is listed as a participant list. What it does is it kind of prevents, I don't know if anybody's experienced Zoom bombing yet, but it prevents some of that, those opportunities to Zoom bomb a meeting and kind of disrupt the entire thing. And then if you're listed as a participant rather than a panelist, you can't just jump in and unmute yourself and start talking. Using features like Q&A allow people to ask questions that the panelists can handle or the school committee can handle as they deem fit. So just have some rules in place for how that's to occur, and just talk to your if you're going to do that, talk to your technology director on how to kind of set some of these things up. So you had a meeting, now you have in between the two meetings, community members have questions. What's the best way of handling those questions? So we talk about individual members requesting information or action from the superintendent. The superintendent does not work for 7 people. He works for one group of people. So individual members have no authority to direct the superintendent to do anything. And we try to make that really clear in our orientation training, that you are now one of a board and only the board can direct the employees to do anything. As an individual member, you have no authority whatsoever. So you need to, as chair, you need to set up a protocol for how members can get questions to the superintendent or to any other staff member. And that's usually either through the chair or through a designated, this is where vice chairs can come in really handy, is that, if you have a question, everything's going to funnel for questions from the committee to staff is going to funnel through the vice chair. The vice chair is going to take care of that thing. It's just a shared leadership role. And again, we talk about requesting information, action, and again, staff, it should be the same thing. It should go through the chair or vice chair and to the superintendent to staff, not directly to staff. Now, if you had a question on a presentation that was done last night and you notified, let's say the vice chair, you notified the vice chair, and the vice chair notified the superintendent may say, have the school committee member call directly to the staff member, it's okay. And that's fine, you followed your protocol. The superintendent made the decision that you can speak directly to the staff member. And when the relationship develops and there's a strong bond of trust and respect between the school committee and the superintendent, that's what happens. That's type of things like that begin to happen. The less formal strategy or the less formal protocols of communication kind of go by the wayside until somebody blows it up. Again, same thing, pick a person. Now, one of the things you may want to do as a committee in the superintendent is, at a summer retreat, summer workshop, work this out between you. Have a conversation with the superintendent as a committee and say, how do we want to agree that these things, these 5 bullets, and this PowerPoint will be available on our website as well as the recording from today. How do these 5 bullets, how do we handle those? Let's come up with an agreed upon process of an individual member having a question. How is the school committee going to superintendent communicate between meetings? What types of communication will be that the superintendent will be kind of responsible to contact each member, or does it go to the chair and the chair makes the decision if it goes to every member, and then does the chair make that send out that communication? Come to an agreement. And this, even every time your committee changes, every time there's a new member, you should sit down again and agree upon this. The last thing a new member wants to hear is, well, this is the way we do it. That person didn't sign into that, wasn't part of that process. Do it right after or as soon as possible after the election. Just kind of have a schedule it as a workshop, but it's just more of a, this is typically how we communicate, this is how we do it, blah, 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 blah. And then at a meeting, subsequent meeting, you report out that these are, again, the protocols that we've agreed to for communicating between the school committee and staff, and the committee votes it, and there it's formal. So now it's a formal process. And the other component is sometimes you have members who travel. Hopefully they alert you ahead of time that I'm going to be out the week before this meeting. I may or may not be back for the meeting, but if I'm not back, I'll participate being Zoom. So there's going to be a process ensuring that that person gets the material ahead of time, whether you're using Google Drive or some other Dropbox or some other online storage thing, but making sure that that person gets the material in ample time to be prepared for the meeting. And this is, that's the frustrating part when you're on Zoom for those presentations that happen at the meeting, and then you just get the material handed to you before the time. When you're participating remotely, that just can't happen. You can't just drop it off at the table. There's got to be a way of getting it ahead of time. Again, between meetings, your role, your individual role in public as a member is you always wear the hat, so to speak. Everybody knows you're a school committee member. When you go into a school to parent-teacher conferences, the teacher knows you're a school committee member. One of the things that I always encourage people to say is, if you're going into a school to talk about your child, which you always have the right to do, you just let the teacher know, I'm here as Johnny or Mary's parent. I'm not here as a school committee member. This has nothing to do with that role. Just put it out there. But you always, as an elected official, your constituents always have the right to bring their grievances to you. So how do you handle those? Again, that should be an agreed upon process. If a parent has an issue with a teacher, we should be sending it to the teacher. And the same thing if it's coming to the chair. If a committee member says, I received this email, whatever, and it's like, well, understanding this role of handling complaints, that's part of what the chair's responsibility is, ensuring that members follow the same rules as everybody else. Community engagement. Many times the chair is going to be asked to make presentations at Rotary, Kiwanis, things like that. Just making sure that when you go, you are representing the committee and you're representing the position the committee is taken on certain things. If the committee has not yet taken a position, you should be really clear about the committee has yet to take a position on this issue. So I really can't say how or which way the committee is going to fall on this. There's been no public debate yet. The thing with social media, excuse me, is that there's no filter for social media. If you do have social media accounts, that if your committee has a social media page or anything like that, it really should be one-way communication, so to speak. If you do allow comments, just be aware that you can't block anybody. It's it's part of a public domain. You're using it for school committee business. So if somebody says something there, you really can't block them. The only thing you can try to do, and I wouldn't debate them, but simply respond with factual information, but not to the person. I would respond to the whole page with the factual information. Again, as a committee member, in particular as a chair, you're going to get certain confidential information that might should not be released to the publicly. There are times when the chair will share, excuse me, the superintendent will share with the chair, some information that may not necessarily be shared with the rest of the committee, particularly if it's a personnel matter. And you just have to be aware that you may get information that is not really eligible to be shared with the rest of the committee yet. You might know it ahead of time, but it'll eventually come out with the rest of the committee. But you just have to maintain this. Things might be still fluid with that. And again, school visits, reminding committee members that if you want to do a school visit, you have to schedule it through the superintendent to the building principal. And you're there, you're there as a citizen, really, not as a school committee member, even though you are a school committee member, but you have no more right to school visits than any other community member, any other taxpayer. I want to go back for a second. So, let me go back. I skipped something. All right, so one of the I guess tricks of the trade, is when the ability, what are the tools you need as a chair, particularly if you're looking at contentious meetings or things that might have heated debate. One of the best tools that I think is available to you is the Selected General Law book. Every committee member gets one of these every year. I think the new ones will probably be out in August. You can see I have a couple of pages tagged here, and in the one section that they have tagged here is Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20G, subsection G. And that's the statute I was talking about before, where no person shall address the meeting of a public body without permission of the chair, and all persons shall, at the request of the chair, be silent. So, and no person shall disrupt the proceedings of a meeting of a public body if, after clear warning from the chairperson continues to disrupt the proceedings, they can be removed. One caution on that: make sure you have a conversation as a chair. Make sure you have a conversation with your chief of police about people disrupting your meetings, and that if you call them, will they actually show up and remove the person who's disrupting your meeting? One of the worst things that can happen is you pull that card out and you call the police, they show up, and the officers refuse to remove the person because the police chief told them not to. So before you pull that card, before you pull that ace out of your pocket, make sure that the police chief is on board with it as well. The other thing is you don't need to be an expert in parliamentary procedure. This is the Roberts Rules, newly revised. Actually, I think there's even a newer version of this one. It's got a gold cover. And there are a couple of things in here that I've tagged that I think are important, but it's up to you to do the exact same thing. This is kind of daunting to look through. It's a bunch of pages. 663 pages long. So this is a little bit daunting to look at. There are a few other ones that are a little bit easier to look at. This is one of them. It's called Parliamentary Procedure at a Glance. The author is O. Garfield Jones. It's available on Amazon. The thing I like about this one is the very middle section. There's a little flip chart. I don't know if you can see that, but a little flip chart with some of the parliamentary, most commonly used parliamentary motions. So if you're unsure, this gives you a little place to kind of, oh, what's rising to a point of order? What's that? And you flip open to the chart and it tells you exactly what it is. And then what your response is as chair. There are a couple of other ones out there. There's the Complete Idiot's Guide to Parliamentary Procedure. There's one that's written by Jim Slaughter, the notes and comments about Robert's rules. And then there's in the Complete Idiot's Guide to Parliamentary Procedure, there's also a Complete Idiot's Guide to Robert's rules. These are just a couple of tools. Personally, I would suggest this one that you have in what I call my go bag. Meaning it's a little bag I bring every single time I was chair. It contained a copy of the general laws. It contained the parliamentary procedure rules book. This is another one that everyone should have received when they did their new member orientation. It's a little laminated card. It basically takes the center out of that parliamentary procedure at a glance one and puts it on a little pocket card. These are available from our office as well. And then probably the most effective tool a chair has is to control a meeting is the gavel. Some chairs only use it to call people to order. Some chairs use it to call the meeting to order, and then every time there's a vote, they rap the gavel to formalize the vote that the vote's done. But to control a meeting, this is a useful tool if things are starting to get a little rambunctious. Depending on what type of table you sit at, if it's plastic, it's not going to sound very good, not very loud. So sometimes you may want to get a little sounding block for it, so it's a little bit louder. But then there are those times when even that won't work, so you may need something like this. That's a joke. Works pretty well. Particularly if you kind of pull it out of the bag and you raise it up in the hand and bang it on the table. Kind of breaks everybody from their reverie. Some of the things we talk about in the session is a kind of wrap up here as they approach 1 o'clock. It's real important for the chair to maintain the protocol of the meeting, ensure that everyone's voice is heard, the committee members' voices are heard, that no one person dominates the meeting, and they're kind of like that simple rule. We're going to go around. I'm going to ask everybody for their comments, starting with Mr. Smith. And thank you, Mr. Smith and Mrs. Jones. Now, some committees are a little bit less formal. You're using a little bit less formal protocol, but still the process is still the same. No one speaks twice before everyone speaks once. And if you haven't raised your hand, I will call on you to see if you do have any comments. And if you say I have nothing further to add to the conversation, that's great. Thank you, and move on to the next person. Then it would be, does anybody have anything new to add to the conversation? It's probably a good question as well. So that people aren't simply reiterating things that have already been said. So with that, I'll ask if there are any questions. Oh, here we go. Does the chair have the authority to approve emergency time-sensitive funding requests if it's not possible to schedule a meeting with the whole committee? Or can time-sensitive items be added to an existing agenda less than 48 hours in advance? Well, the answer is no and yes. No statute gives the chair authority to authorize emergency funding because the money is controlled by the committee. I don't know if your city charter or a town charter might. Bylaws wouldn't. These bylaws aren't special acts of the legislature. However, there is a clause in the 48-hour notice is that the 48-hour notice includes those items the chair reasonably anticipates will be discussed at the meeting. But if something was to happen within the 48 hours and the committee was going to need to take a vote on something, the chair could add it to the agenda. But in doing so, you should amend the online agenda as soon as you know you're going to do it, even if it's 1 hour before the meeting. As soon as you know that you have to add this item for action of the committee, you should also amend the 48 hours notice that you posted. You're welcome, Taryn. Are there any other questions? Given the recording of school committee meetings, and as you said, the importance of vision and eye contact during dialogue, do you have any recommendation of practice how to arrange the table? Yeah, I do. Horseshoe or a U. The straight line across is the worst group dynamic setting ever. So if you can curve your tables in like a V, or I can't do this with my hands, but let me see. Or a U, so you go up, across, and down. The idea being that no matter where you sit around that table, you can see everybody else around the table. If you have a perceived head or center of the table, that's where the chair should preside, so the chair can see left and right, see everybody. A U works as well, but if you're going to use a U, I would suggest the chair sits at one end, meaning you go up, over, down. Like the middle might be a little bit longer, but you come down on the sides. I would strongly suggest the chair sits on one side so they can see the entire row of people. But yeah, from a group dynamic setting, straight table right across is the worst format ever. Does public comment have to be at the beginning of the meeting? No. Can it be done at the end? Yes. It can be anywhere in the agenda that the committee decides it wants to be. I've seen it in the middle, where you've had discussions like presentations from groups, then you have public comment, and then you have action items. That way, people feel they have the ability to make a comment after something's been presented, rather than try to anticipate the presentation and put their comment at the very beginning of the meeting. If you do it at the very end, meaning it's the last thing on the agenda, all the action has been done for the meeting, so all the comments you're going to get are complaints about things that you did ahead of time. I don't recommend it at the end. I think either the beginning or the middle. And again, you can, the policy can be, it's 20 minutes, regardless of how many people line up. After 20 minutes, we're closing it. Or you can say it's 20 minutes, and then after 20 minutes, anybody who still wants to comment, we will reopen it at the end of the meeting. There's no reason you have to sit there for an hour and a half with public comment. You have whatever your policy is, you can put a time limit on it. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to. Thank you, Marianne. If there are no other questions, I will say thank you very much. Note that this is being recorded, and the recording and the PowerPoint will be made available on our website. I'm guessing probably by Monday. Anthony, if it's not true, let me know. Thank you all. I appreciate you taking some, what turns out to be a sunny Friday noontime with me. And I hope everybody has a great weekend.